In 2023, a Chelsea player signed an 8.5-year contract. 8.5 years. For context, that's longer than most marriages, longer than most people keep the same phone number, and about 6 years longer than any sane football club would ever tie itself to a 22-year-old's knee ligaments. Chelsea didn't do this because they thought the guy would still be brilliant at 31. They did it because of a number buried in an accounting rulebook that almost nobody outside a finance department had ever bothered to read closely. And once you see what that number does, you'll understand why rival clubs were reportedly furious enough to lobby the Premier League to change the law, after Chelsea had already spent hundreds of millions of pounds using it. This is the story of amortization, the most boring word in football finance and possibly the most important one of the last decade. Quick rewind. May 2022. Roman Abramovich, the Russian billionaire who'd owned Chelsea for 19 years and quietly bankrolled a golden era of trophies, gets sanctioned by the UK government and forced to sell the club overnight. In comes Todd Boehly, an American businessman who also co-owns the LA Dodgers, fronting a consortium worth about £4.25 billion. Boehly became the public face, the guy who once floated the idea of a Premier League All-Star game, an idea English football has still not forgiven him for. But the real architect standing behind him wasn't Boehly at all. It was Behdad Eghbali, a partner at a private equity firm called Clear Lake Capital. And private equity people don't watch football like fans. They watch it like spreadsheets. They ask one question about every rule. What does this actually restrict? And what does it not restrict yet? Chelsea's new owners looked at English football's profit and sustainability rules, the system everyone shorthands as FFP, and found something almost nobody had exploited before at this scale: a gap around how long a club is allowed to spread a transfer fee across its books. Here's the mechanic, and it's genuinely simple once you strip the jargon out. When a club buys a player, the transfer fee doesn't hit the accounts as one lump loss in year one. It gets divided across the length of his contract, amortized. So the cost shows up gradually, the same way a business might depreciate a piece of machinery over its useful life, instead of expensing the whole purchase at once. Sign someone for £60 million on a 5-year deal, and your books show £12 million of cost per year, not $60 million all at once. That part is completely normal. Every club in Europe does this. It's not the trick. It's just the tool the trick was built on top of. What Chelsea worked out is that nothing in the Premier League's rulebook at that specific moment said contracts had to be a normal length. So instead of 5-year deals, players started signing for 6, 7, 8, even 8.5 years. Wesley Fofana signed for 7 years. Marc Cucurella for 6. Mykhailo Mudryk signed for around £88 million, went on an 8.5-year deal, one of the longest in the sport's modern history. Suddenly, that same £88 million transfer fee wasn't costing over $10 million a year on the books. It was costing barely $10 million, spread thinner, sometimes closer to 9 or 10, across a much longer runway. Same fee, same player, same actual money leaving the bank account, paid in full to the selling club, up front or in installments as usual. But on the one document the regulator actually checks, the annual FFP calculation, the damage looked dramatically smaller. Spread thin across years, nobody would be auditing this closely by the time they arrived. Now stack that across an entire strategy, not just one signing. In the summer of 2022 alone, Chelsea spent roughly £270 million on new players: Fofana, Cucurella, Aubameyang, Sterling, Koulibaly, and more. Then in January 2023, in the middle of the season, they spent nearly another £300 million, including Enzo Fernandez for a British record fee, and Mudryk on that 8.5-year deal. By the time you tally the full run from mid-2022 through 2024, Chelsea had committed well over £1 billion in transfer spending, an amount that, under normal 5-year amortization, would have crushed almost any club's FFP position within a single assessment cycle. Instead, spread across contracts averaging 6, 7, 8 years, the annual accounting hit looked almost restrained. It wasn't that the money vanished. It was that the accounting impact of the money got pushed years down the road, past the window where anyone was watching hardest, into seasons where the player might have already been sold, loaned out, or forgotten entirely. Chelsea didn't stop at players either. In 2023, they sold 2 hotels near Stamford Bridge, the Millennium and Copthorne Hotels, to Blueco, a sister company under the exact same ownership group, for £76 million. Same owners on both sides of the table. That $76 million landed on the books as pure profit, directly offsetting losses elsewhere in that financial year. It's the accounting version of selling your car to your own brother at full price, still parking it in your driveway every night, and telling everyone you're debt-free. The Premier League eventually required an independent valuation of that deal before it would count toward FFP compliance, which tells you a lot about how unusual regulators found it. None of this broke any rule that existed. That's what made it so infuriating to everyone else. UEFA had already closed this exact loophole a year earlier, in 2022, capping amortization at 5 years for any transfer fee, regardless of actual contract length. But that cap only applied to European competitions, not the domestic Premier League rulebook. Chelsea walked straight through a door UEFA had bricked up in one building, in a building UEFA didn't govern at all. For a club that wasn't even in the Champions League for a chunk of this period, the domestic loophole was the only one that mattered, and it was wide open. Rival clubs noticed immediately. Manchester City, Liverpool, and Newcastle. Clubs already under intense financial scrutiny themselves, City in particular facing its own mountain of alleged FFP breaches, reportedly pushed hard behind the scenes for the Premier League to shut this down. Executives at other clubs were said to view Chelsea's approach as making a mockery of the entire point of financial regulation, since the whole idea behind FFP was supposed to be preventing clubs from spending far beyond their actual means. If you can make £1 billion of spending look moderate just by writing longer contracts, what exactly is the rule protecting against anymore? And it worked. In June 2023, the Premier League rewrote the rule, capping amortization at 5 years for FFP purposes no matter how long a contract actually ran. Any contract signed after that point, even an 8-year deal, would still only get its costs spread over 5 years on the books. The loophole closed. Future signings couldn't repeat the trick. But closing a door after someone's already carried hundreds of millions of pounds through it doesn't undo the walk. Chelsea got the benefit precisely during the window when the rule didn't exist yet. Every long contract signed before that June 2023 cutoff kept its original amortization schedule, grandfathered in under the old rules. They built an entire transfer strategy around a gap in the regulations, used it at a scale no club had ever attempted, and watched the rule change land right behind them, too late to touch what they'd already done. It's a bit like finding out the speed limit on a stretch of motorway was never actually posted, driving as fast as your car would go for 18 months, and then watching them put the sign up right as you're pulling into the services. This is really what modern football has quietly become. The transfers, the unveilings, the shirt numbers, that's the layer everyone watches, argues about, builds highlight reels around. Underneath it is a second game, played with contract clauses and amortization schedules and related party sales, and the winners of that second game don't necessarily lift trophies. They just make sure the regulator never has a reason to knock. Chelsea's actual results on the pitch during this period were, frankly, mixed at best. Multiple managerial changes, a chaotic run of form, a squad so bloated with signings that some players barely got minutes. But financially, the operation behind the scenes was arguably the most sophisticated the Premier League had ever seen from a single ownership group. And here's the uncomfortable part. Chelsea didn't cheat. That word gets thrown around constantly in comment sections, and it's just wrong. Cheating means breaking a rule that existed. Chelsea found a rule that hadn't been written yet, used it with more precision and nerve than any club before them, and forced the entire sport to rewrite its own laws in response. That's not cheating. It's proof the system was never as airtight as everyone assumed, and that the only real defense against financial engineering is having someone clever enough to spot the gap before the regulators do. If anything, you could argue the Premier League should have seen this coming. UEFA had already patched the exact same hole a year earlier. The domestic league simply hadn't bothered to follow suit until a private equity firm walked in and showed them, in real time, exactly why they should have. Zoom out, and this isn't really a football story at all. Every regulatory system, tax law, banking rules, salary caps, is a finite set of words trying to govern an infinite number of possible behaviors. There will always be edge cases the people who wrote the rules never imagined. And there will always be someone with enough financial sophistication to find that edge case before anyone else does, and enough confidence to actually use it at scale before it gets patched. Private equity didn't invent that instinct. It's the same instinct that drives leveraged buyouts, aggressive tax structuring, dividend recapitalizations, squeezing every possible advantage out of the letter of a rule while technically staying inside it. What made this case remarkable wasn't the strategy itself. It was watching that exact playbook, usually reserved for corporate boardrooms, get applied to a football club with the same cold precision, in full public view, with every contract length published for anyone who cared to add it up. So where did the money actually go? Nowhere, really. Every transfer fee still got paid in full. Every player still got their wages. The hotels are still standing exactly where they always stood, still operating, still owned and practiced by the same people. Nothing physically disappeared. What disappeared was the appearance of financial strain at the exact moment regulators were watching most closely. The spending didn't go away. The evidence of it, on the one page that mattered, in the specific years it would have counted most, did. Legally. Cleanly. Years before most of the league even understood it was possible, and roughly 12 months before the loophole itself got sealed shut for good. And that's the real lesson sitting underneath this whole saga. The scoreboard everyone stares at, wins, transfer fees, headline numbers on transfer deadline day, was never the scoreboard that mattered most here. The real one was buried in a spreadsheet almost nobody outside a finance office ever opens, tracking amortization schedules against a regulatory clock. And Chelsea had already won that game before most of their rivals even realized it had started. By the time the Premier League caught up and rewrote its own rulebook, Chelsea had already banked years of breathing room no other club in the league's history had ever been handed, locked into contracts that will keep paying off their books long after most of those players have moved on. Whether you think that's brilliant or infuriating probably depends entirely on which crest is on your shirt. But it's the same story finance tells across every industry, on a loop, whether it's a football club, a hedge fund, or a multinational avoiding tax through a jurisdiction nobody bothered to regulate properly. The people who win big aren't always the ones who spend the most, or work the hardest, or even build the best product. Sometimes they're just the ones who actually finish reading the rulebook and find the one sentence nobody else noticed was left unfinished. Use it while it's still there, and let everyone else spend the next 2 years arguing about whether what they did was fair.